Hello everyone. Today I'll be discussing bishop and pawn endings, opposite colored bishops, and this time the pawns aren't connected. If you haven't watched my video yet on opposite colored bishops with the pawns doubled, you should go watch that first because this is a more complicated case. So let's begin. Right now, white's trying to promote its pawns, but there's a problem that there's a bishop in the way, and this bishop is controlling this whole diagonal right over here. So we kind of gotta get around that. And the most important thing to note here is that there's a square that's absolutely important, because let's say this bishop over here, it wasn't there. Let's say it wasn't there, okay? Then we could just move our bishop right over here, push this pawn, and there's no way to stop the promotion of the pawn on this square. So there's just no way. But the problem is that there's a defensive resource, and this defensive resource is that if the pawn just let's see, if the pawn just hold on, let me just delete the color. If the pawn just tries to go right away and checks the king so that then we move the bishop here, well, that's not going to work because the bishop will actually just sacrifice itself, and after this pawn takes back, the king just takes back and it's a draw. So we have to get around that. And the way that we do that is, well, we would just play the bishop right here. And then we would just move the king here, and there's no way to stop that. But of course that's too easy, right? It's black to move. So black stops the king from getting to f7 over here by playing king to e8. Now there's no way for the king here to get to f7 because after bishop to b5, then the king just goes to f8, and now this is completely stopped. There's no way for this to happen. Okay, this control of the black king on this square is not gonna work, and there's no dark squared bishop that we can use to move this king out of the way, and that's why opposite color bishops require a certain technique. But the most important thing to note is that we can still control this square right here. So obviously we need to head in one direction, and that's towards the left. So if the king goes to the right, we go to the left. If the king goes to the left, we go to the right. And what's going to happen now is that we're going to do exactly that. We're going to go to king to e4, and there's no way for black to get back, for example, king to e8, because there's a bishop right here. So this is actually impossible for black. So that's the thing that we have in our favor. So after bishop to a3, because black has to keep an eye on this pawn over here. For example, if bishop to c3 attacking the undefended pawn, well, we just push the pawn and promotion is right there, just around the corner. So bishop to a3, keeping the eye on this square. King to d5, bishop to b4, king to c6, bishop to a3, king to d7. And now that we've gained control of the square, we're going to push the pawns. But let's go back to the original position. After king to e8, bishop to b5 check, king to f8. Instead of king to f8, black could have played king to d8, but now this is important to realize, is after king to d8, you may have thought about that, and that's good, because now you can notice that if the king was invisible and transparent, we would just move the white king towards d6 and play e6 and e7. But obviously there's a bishop in the way. So rules are rules. But what does favor us is that there's a barrier created by our pieces. Is that this barrier prevents the black king from getting back to e8. And now we can go to f7. So king to g6, bishop to a3, and king to f7, and we're going to push the pawn. So let's go to another case. Let's go over here. So what we just learned is that it applies for the pawns, the connected pawns that are on the 6th rank, and none of them are A and B pawns. But suppose that one of the pawns was on the A file, then the other pawn connected is on the B file. So the big difference here, I want you to think about it for a minute. So think about it and pause the video if you want to think about it. Okay, so the difference is that the left side of the board is cut off. So usually when this black king goes right here, we would just go around and get to, in this case it doesn't exist, but the square left of A7, that's where the white king would be. That supports the pawn push to A7 because the king cannot go back to A8 because there's a king to the left of A7. But obviously that's impossible here. So that means that if the black king gets to B8, then after, for example, after king to B8, bishop to F4, king to C8, it's a draw. Because the only way to promote a queen is for B7 and B8 to happen. Because if king to B8 and then A7 check, then king to A8, and then the bishop just moves along the long diagonal and the pawns are blocked. So you have to basically prevent king to C8. For example, if you play king to B4, king to B8, that's a draw. Bishop to F4, king to C8. It's not a draw in the middle of the board or even one file to the right, because then the king just goes to this square and it supports this pawn push right here. But that's impossible here. So because there's no way for the white king to get to A7. So we have to absolutely prevent the king getting to C8 by playing bishop to F4 right away. And now it's obvious where the king should go. The king needs to go to B4, then C5, then D6, and then C7. Now, something interesting to note is that when the king gets to D6, it's in the way of the bishop. But this isn't a problem, as you will see. When the king gets to D6 and the king plays to B8, what's white's best move? Think about it. Okay, so the answer is that the white king will go to D7 and it's a discovered check, forcing the king back to A8, and then we play king to C7. Here it is. For example, bishop to G2, king to B4, bishop to F3, king to C5, bishop to G2, king to D6, king to B8, and now this is the only move. King to D7, check. So kings can get a check. King to A8, and now you can even play, you cannot really play this. It still wins because you just go back to C7. And that's it. You're basically forcing a promotion here. This arrow, hang on. Yeah, the yellow arrow is more correct. Okay, and finally, let's go to this position. So the positions I've shown so far are from the basic chess endings book, and they're by Reuben Fine, the 2003 version. And these were so far endings 389 and 390. So this is the most critical position here is what happens when you have a pawn on the 6th rank and a pawn on the 5th rank. You have to get the 5th rank pawn up to the 6th rank, but it would be captured by the king. So we have to prevent this. So something I want you to notice is that near the very end, on the final king move before promotion, when white is supporting the pawn, the white king makes a shape with the pawns. The white king forms either a compact square with the pawns if the black king is to the right, and a snake or an S shape if the black king is to the left. So you're going to see that right now. It'll become evident again. But take a look at the current position. What is white threatening? So take a minute to think about it. What would white do if it was white's move? Okay. If it was white's move, then basically we would just play the bishop to c4. This forces the king away, and it forces it to g6 right here. But then we just play bishop to d5, and that's check. Then the king has to go back to f7, back to where it started, and then we just move this king right over here to f5, and then we push the pawn. So for example, let me get rid of all these cutters. If we have something like I'm not sure I can insert a no move, but I'll figure that out. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so bishop to c4, king to g6, bishop to d3 check, king to f7, king to f5, bishop to c3, threatening to attack to capture the pawn, but now g6 check. And now bishop to bishop takes f6 would be perfect, but that's impossible. So this is obviously winning. And the white king will go to h7 after bishop to c4, which prevents any access to these squares. So we have that barrier again. Okay, so here's actually a shape I want to show you. Okay, let me get rid of that. Okay, for example, bishop to, well, actually the shape's not necessary because I'm just going to push this pawn. So let me go back to the original position. Okay, after king to e6, preventing bishop to c4, for example, if bishop to c4, then king to h5, king to e5, then we can't just push this pawn right away because of bishop to b4 followed by bishop to f8. Okay, that should have been red arrows. So there you go. So that's obviously bad. Let's go back. So king to h5 has to be played, and now we can play bishop to h3, which controls this whole diagonal and basically forces the king to go either down or up to f7. But if the king goes to f7, we just play, for example, a bishop to b4, then bishop to h3 wouldn't work anymore. So let's go back for a minute. After king to h5, bishop to b4, then king to g6, exactly. We need to prevent the king from getting to f7. If the king tries to get to f7 right now, hang on, bishop to b4. If the king tries to get to f7 right now, so right here, king to h5. If the king tries to get to f7, bishop to c4 right now, and we get control of the right side of g7, which is the key square, which will always be a different color than our bishop. So notice that g7 is different than the bishop on c4. Key squares are always different colored because in opposite colored bishop endings, the other side tries to control that color, and we have to use our king to control it because our bishop can't do that. So it's always going to be a different color. And now the black king has to go one way or the other. If the black king goes to e8, then we just walk our king to h7. If the black king was on h8, though, we just go the other way, and then the game will be over. So king e8, g6. Okay. Now let's go back to king to h5. If king to f5, bishop to h3, king to e5, king to g6 wins. So do you see how? So it would win because after bishop to c3, king to f7, just not king to g7, because it's not the right pawn. You have to control the promotion square with your own colored bishop. King to f4, king to h6, basically is repeating the position more or less. Not g6 because of king g5 winning the pawn, because of the pin. So it's the pin that really makes everything bad. So king to h6, yeah. Let's go back to bishop to b4. After king g6, bishop to d2, bishop to h3 check, forces the king back, and then we just play the king to f7, and then g5, g6, g7, winning. So that's it. And if you remember that you'll form a shape with the king and the pawns, they'll form a square, and then, or it'll form a snake, then you'll know you're on the right path. Like if we go back to this ending, 389, right here you have a square. You have a square. The king is on f7. There is an invisible square that we have control of on e7. Then we have the pawns on e6 and f6. So that's a square. And if we go back, then right here we have a snake. Okay. So this was what would have happened if the king went to f8. You have the squares right here, and this square should be yellow. That's a snake, or an S. It's a reverse S, but it's kind of looking like a snake. You can see the king has a head, and the pawn is a tail. So that's it. That's all there is to bishop and pawn endings when it comes to the 6th rank. And next video we'll be analyzing the 5th rank. So if you enjoyed this video, if you think it helped you, please donate to paypal.me/queenmypawn, or you can click the link in the description. And thank you for watching.